CTO of Together and also a professor at the University of Chicago with us. You might not, Together is providing a lot of the world's AI infrastructure right now. And so this is a tremendous success. But in the past, Chair has done some really fundamental work in how we can enable decentralized AI of various kinds to become real. And so I've been inspired by a number of his papers at NeurIPS and ICML, all the way back, I think even to 2018, even further. So I thought it was, he was happy to stop by and talk to us about this topic. So I thought we could start there. So Chair, do you want to say perhaps what were some of the motivations for you and your group to start to study different kinds of decentralization and some of those challenges?
Yeah, so I think we start to explore that. I think almost like 2016, when I started as professor at ETH Zurich. So as a young professor looking for things to actually work on. So we are kind of inspired by quite a few line of work. And one of them is actually like from your group, right? So you have been doing a lot of work about mobile sensing, right? So about that line of work is really inspirational and really big fan of that line of work. So what I kind of learned back then was this interesting coupling between data and compute, right? There's going to be a very interesting dynamics. So one paradigm could be you just bring data to a centralized pool of compute, right? But the other extreme would be you start to bring the compute actually go all the way back to the decentralized data, right? So of course, the real world probably somewhere in the middle, but as academic, the one question that we were thinking about is, okay, how about we just push to the extreme and to see what could happen, right? So in 2017, we have this very weird paper about, can you actually train a neural network with 100 GPU when they can only talk to their neighbor, right? So surprisingly, from algorithm perspective, you can actually get the same convergence rate as a centralized paradigm, but you get a lot of benefit both on communication and potentially about how everything can get from disaggregation, right? But you still get the same model in the end. So, and we just continue to push that line of work in the last almost 10 years. So a couple years ago, we have this weird experiment where we have 8 different cities. Every single city has a GPU. How can you train a language model, right? And surprisingly, it works to some extent, right? So, and that is actually what we have been very excited about. Yeah. So in the last 10 years, and super happy to see company like Flower to actually just take this area and actually bring many of the things actually to production, to the real world.
Yeah, I mean, I think an interesting insight that your work had was that the federated work at that time was very hell-bent about data having to be private. So the motivations were about how can you train with data not moving. But you had this sort of really important motivation that this you could have these networks of GPUs perhaps around the world in different areas, and if that's a sitting, how could you train under that sort of infrastructure? It wasn't motivated by privacy, but it was motivated by how could you leverage that type of underutilized resource that might happen to be physically spread. What do you think some of the really interesting applications of being able to do this are going to be in the longer term?
Yeah, so I feel one thing that, just thinking about decentralization for the last 10 years, I feel one thing that is really interesting, which I don't have an answer for, is I feel we are almost there as a community to figure out what is the top one benefit of decentralization, right? So I think it can come from different perspectives. It can either come from the data side, from privacy, right, the control of the data. But on the other hand, being able to loosely couple infrastructure can also potentially give you a lot of benefit, right? So that those compute do not need to be in the same place. You can actually allow every single site to actually grow, but you don't have to have a strong constraint about the scale, right? You can start to put different cities, have different data centers, and figure out how to connect all of those. I feel either the privacy side, because people take the privacy and security of AI really, really seriously, right? So I think it's a very important problem. Maybe that will motivate kind of one top application of decentralization, or maybe there's some concrete benefit from infrastructure side to push people more to the decentralized part. I have no idea which one will be the top one application for the coming years, or which one will mature the first. But I'm really excited to see what that will be. I feel that day will come really, really soon.
Yeah, I agree. do you think we're at a stage now that we can reliably perform the same as centralized settings? Or what are the kind of key points? Because when I talk to folks, there's often a lot of skeptics out there. They're skeptical if it really a decentralized method could perform as well as a centralized one. Do you think, how far away from being able to do this in general?
Yeah, so I feel from the algorithm side, I think the community have been working on that for almost like 20 years, right? So starting from, there's a really interesting paper called Gossip SGD, I think like 15 years ago, right? So, and people have been pushing that. So there's decentralization, there's asynchrony, and then there's a lot of things about communication compression, right? So you can actually combine those to actually find an algorithm that not only works theoretically, but I think also works like in practice. So I think from the technology side, it's pretty much almost there, right? So I feel what's really exciting that for coming to figure out is really what is a strong reason that you have to do this thing in a decentralized fashion. So what is that benefit that you cannot get in a centralized way? Because when we talk about decentralization from the algorithm side, it's always about, okay, how can we match centralized paradigm from convergence rate, right? So if you can only match it, then you need another dimension, which is, okay, so I can match that here, but the other dimension, I can actually outperform centralized paradigm. I think the community just need to figure out what that thing is. And the moment we agree on what that thing is, I think you are going to see that technology everywhere.
Right. I mean, one potential area that it could motivate people to sort of dive into the space would be if they start to see it as a way to access more data. That's one of the theses that we're working on. Do you think that in the long term we'll still need more and more data to drive the growth of these models, or do you think that the reliance on sort of real world data is waning to some degree?
Oh, I think we definitely need more data, right? So I think more data comes in multi different ways. Like the aggregation of data will give you better capacity of the model, right? So that's always great. But another dimension is the more you know about the user, the more know about the data, you can potentially have a smaller model to do the same thing, right? There's a whole bunch of economics kind of benefit for you to be able to actually do that. So I think having more data also help the training side, but also could help, for example, the inference side, right? So it could be actually very interesting. So I think one thing that's really exciting, I think from the research perspective about the foundation models, different from like the old model that we trained like 10 years ago, right? Is that those models are really powerful, right? So I think there's a new level of what decentralized learning really means. It used to be we start to get intelligence into the weights. Like essentially we have all the parties to try to agree on the weights. But maybe now we can actually reach the level of abstraction to try to treat every single model as an agent. You start to have decentralized intelligence not at the model level, but also at maybe at a higher level. Maybe those agents can talk English to each other, right? So I think there's a very interesting paradigm of decentralized learning that's going to come in the next couple of years. I have no idea what it is, right?
Yeah,
but the professor is very excited about that.
Interesting. I mean, it's timely that you mentioned agents just now, because one could foresee that there's a lot of excitement with agents, people interested in their applications, what they can do for us. And then as we study sort of the agent stack, it's plausible that a lot of the decentralized methods will become key parts of that. Is there any particular aspect of challenges from just decentralized training that you think will naturally flow into different kinds of agent setups?
Yeah, so I think that's kind of interesting. So like one paper that's from one of my students last year. So he kind of looked at this in a very interesting way. Is I think one thing that foundation models start to change is the notion of learning start to get much more broad, right? So learning doesn't mean you can only have like a new model, but you can have different prompts, you can have prefix, right? Yeah. So there are so many different ways to enforce consensus among different players. So the old way of updating the gradient is one way, but there's a whole spectrum of learning. They actually introduce different capacity at different stage of learning, right? So one thing that's very interesting is now you have a physical topology about who can talk to whom and what is the cost of one agent talk to the other. And there's also regulations about who can talk to whom, about what information. How can you map this whole spectrum of learning all the way to the physical topology, right? of all the constraint of communication. So that's a really, really exciting problem. So I think it's just probably the most exciting time for decentralized learning from a research perspective, in my opinion.
Interesting. If you zoom out from just considering about this decentralized optimization and you think of the other components that are needed in the ecosystem, are there any particular challenges in that broader perspective that you would like to see someone solve? It could be things to do with discovery. There could be the things to do with verification of work that's done. Is there, in this broader perspective, what would be your favorite kind of problem that would push us forward?
Yeah, so I feel one interesting thing about decentralization is it just have a large coverage of some dimension, right? So it can cover a lot of data, cover a lot of compute, right? So that's where the power is, right? So I think some notion of a catalog of compute and catalog of data, right? How can I represent the uniqueness of data that every individual hold, right? So how to have that one interface to really understand the spatial part of the data and what each site can actually provide. I think if you figure that out, it's going to be amazing.
Right. Because in some settings, in some sense, the existing ways of training are still somewhat toy, even at large scale, because a lot of the realistic problems are ignored, like normalization between data or being able to understand varying levels of quality. We just sort of ignore those things. Another aspect I was interested to ask you about is that one of the reasons why centralized and data center centric training works is because of a lot of the innovation and the underlying hardware and the software. A lot of work has taken place in order for that to be even possible. And then if we look at decentralized methods, they're often having to exist in an ecosystem and hardware and a setup that was never designed for them to run. What do you think are some of the kind of types of technology, like perhaps it's changing in network, maybe it's changing in low power compute? What are the different types of infrastructure changes that might change in the future that would be a huge unlock for decentralized methods?
Yeah, so I think the infrastructure is really getting there, right? So when we read the paper, I think that's 3 years ago, we wrote a paper about how to train foundation models over 500 megabits of network, right? So, and back then, I was like, is that really possible, right? What is 500 megabits? It's a lot. And today, at home, AT&T gave you 1 gigabits, right? So I was looking at the bundles, this is crazy, right? So I think the world definitely make decentralized learning a lot easier. So this couple years compared with 10 years ago. So another trend I think that's very interesting is people start to build a very powerful edge device. I think the notion of edge device start to change. It's not really a small sensor, not really about the phone, right? I mean, you can put 1 petaflops into a very small box, right? So, and that become a very powerful network device, right? So I think both start to kind of make decentralized learning really exciting. And the model at every single site also become much more powerful than 10 years ago, right? So I think that open up a whole bunch of opportunities for decentralized learning. But on the other hand, should we build the infrastructure that's tailored for decentralization? I think that's also very interesting. I'm kind of curious about how you think about that.
Well, I mean, I guess there'd be some design decisions that would take place if the world was building for decentralized. So maybe there'd be just more memory on the edge. Maybe it'd be different kinds of comms, maybe different pricing structure that would be a real sort of an engine. I think these things are always a flywheel. If we can have this one highly successful decentralized training example even, then that could be enough for folks to really heavily invest of different kinds. I think it would be great actually to take questions from the audience. And so we do have some time. If folks would like to ask Chair some questions about these topics, we can take some questions. Yes, a gentleman in the front. Maybe you could wait for the microphone to get to you.
Yes, thank you very much for the interesting presentation. My question would be regarding the challenges. So just mentioned was the explainability, for example, the catalog or catalog of data and the catalog of the compute. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah. So I think one thing that's interesting about, so at least when we were trying to do decentralized learning like 10 years ago, one of the inspiration was every single site have their own like expertise. And that expertise could be a very unique type of hardware, can be they have a very unique type of data they are not willing to share, right? So there's certain uniqueness for every single site. But then the question is, imagine the whole world, right? You are pretty much covered by all of those, but you don't know, right? When you have a high-level requirement, I want to train a model that can do this, there's actually no way for you to actually find out which collection of agents that you are going to include and for what reason, right? What is the cost of collecting those data in a centralized way? What is the cost of actually using this decentralized paradigm, right? So I think having a very easy to use and complete discovery agent to actually say, oh, now here's your task, here's the 20 site that you should actually contact, and they come together, form a very powerful decentralized subnetwork. If that happens, I think you are going to see the decentralized application actually start to grow more and more, because now there's an interface between a centralized request to the decentralized infrastructure. So in my opinion, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
There's a question just in the front here. I'll go back to the mic.
Yeah. Thank you for the presentation. So my question, who should be deciding based on, like you said, you have a question and then you have 20 different websites, AT&T or T-Mobile, what to suggest? Who should decide that in the models like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So to be honest, I don't know. Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, it depends on what the ecosystem actually look like. So personally, I feel it's actually, I think for like ecosystem to work, there need to be some requirement coming in, right? The moment you have requirement, you start to shape the ecosystem, shape the infrastructure, right? So I think if the requirement, it kind of depends on how homogeneous that requirement is, right? If there are only like 10 biggest problem that we are going to solve using the infrastructure, then I think you are going to see the balance shifting more to the centralized side, right, from the requirement. And for example, like the site at home, right? So try to use a decentralized network to find the aliens, right? So that is interesting, right? That is one big problem from the centralized side and propagate to a decentralized infrastructure. So if the whole thing become a little bit more like every single individual become the source of request, right? So I have something I want to solve that's propagated to a subnetwork, right? In the ecosystem, they will probably see that from kind of leaning toward more decentralization, right? So I actually don't know the answer, right? So I feel in the next couple of years, we'll see that. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's a gentleman here.
Thanks for the chat. I was wondering with the infrastructure question, with the examples that we've seen today of a lot of the federations that are being done, have those groups reused the federation for something else? Is there evidence out there that like it's not just a one-off thing, but because I could see if this were set up like with the hospital system, that you could do something more than just a single problem, that you've already got the plumbing, if you will, or the electrical grid, if you will, set up. Once that electrical grid is set up and the legal stuff is all taken care of and everything, is that being seen right now, or can you envision that?
Yeah, so I think it's one of the power of the decentralized infrastructure, right? It's like you build one thing that can be used for a whole bunch of other purpose, right? So I think from the research side, I think there are a lot of work need to be done on those like multi-tenant siting for infrastructure. So we have done a little bit of work like a couple of years ago, but I think there are a lot of more work from the community about, like if you want to share the infrastructure, what would happen, right? If you have to evict one of the job, right? How can you balance the cost of eviction, right? How can you make sure you understand how to navigate the trade-off? Like even like, how can you make sure everyone is making progress, right? So that's a very hard problem, right? How can you make sure everyone's making progress in a way not only reflect how much flops they are getting, but also the progress toward solving the problem that they care about, right? So I think there are a lot of hard problems to solve to really figure out the multi-tenant setting. But I really think that's one of the key benefits of having this infrastructure, because they can do a lot of things, right? Yeah.
There's a woman there. Oh, sorry, there's a gentleman back there.
So you were speaking about it being very interesting in the state, and the gentleman was speaking about like if we had 20 different or major models, and you were speaking about maybe the models becoming agents versus just models in themselves being more specialized. If we are shifting towards more emphasis on decentralization, can we see it in a sense of more local on-device models being generated, not just being integrated, because of the simple fact that we just don't know, or those baseline regulations for those edge nodes to be able to, I guess, work in its optimal. I guess my question would be, if we're pushing towards decentralization, things like the traditional cloud or even the infrastructure of how we sync data may be changed. So how do we position ourselves to think in that way of what you're saying? Because it is a problem. How, if I'm doing something locally with one model and then I'm working with another and it's all locally, and then I need to sync it, even if it's granted free, how do I know it's accurately being done when the sync is still coming from two different centralized models?
Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting technical question. So I'm not sure I know the answer to that, right? So, but I think it's kind of, to some extent, you also see the similar problem in traditional cloud, right? So it's not really something specific to the model itself. Essentially, every single model, they are unique in their certain way, right? So the simplistic way to measure that is, they are good at different benchmark, right? But on the other hand, even you say they are calling on the same benchmark, they have their different way of behaving, they have different essentially guarantee from safety side, right? There's a whole bunch of kind of difference on the behavior side. I feel one thing that's kind of interesting is there should be like one API layer for you to be able to talk about those things, right? So once you have some way to represent those differences, you start to have research and technology to start to navigate and so that difference and start to consolidate those, right? So I feel that's really what's missing, right? So that's why I think evaluation is always a really important thing for machine learning. It's not only about a single number, it's how can you represent a single model in this very large high-dimensional space, right? Or what that space actually look like. So I think those are really important open research problems that the community have to figure out, right? Yeah.
There's a woman at the...
Yeah, I have a question about the infrastructure again. You mentioned kind of the evolution of bandwidth. I was hoping to also kind of understand your perspectives of deficiencies. What's kind of lacking, do you think, in infrastructure now for decentralized versus centralized? How do you think that evolves? Is this, aside from just bandwidth, acceleration, form factor, how would you want that to be embodied? Maybe not, a couple of years, 5, 10 years down the line. How do you see the infrastructure deficiencies today and how they evolve?
Yeah, so personally, I feel one thing that the community can really benefit from is one big problem that we put together the current infrastructure and try to solve it, right? So because there are so many different ways infrastructure could evolve, right? I think we reach a point that we are ready for some big challenge to really understand where the world should move from now on, right? I think having that, we'll have a clear picture of the infrastructure wish list I have. If you ask me this like 10 years ago, I give you a very clear answer is I need more bandwidth, right? So there's nothing I can do with that, right? I need more capacity on the local model, right? If they can communicate in a higher level way, I can compress my communication, right? And I need more compute, right? So the wish list was really clear like 10 years ago. So, and if you look at what we have today, I feel the community is ready for some very big challenge. I think the new challenge will start to give people an even more clear roadmap about where the infrastructure will go from here. Yeah.
And that's because you feel that a lot of the kind of basic requirements are already in place, and they weren't 10 years ago, but they seem to be now.
Oh yeah, exactly, right. So if you look at what community I've been working on, right, it's like there's almost 20 years of research going into how to coordinate a decentralized network, right? So, and if you look at the compute and look at the bandwidth, so they are at least 10 times more powerful than what we have like 10 years ago, right? It's the right time to revisit the problem. It's like, maybe it's enough, right? So I think that's really exciting time,
Hi. Thinking of a big question, like you mentioned, that maybe society needs to answer. And I don't expect you to answer this, nor is it simple, but I'm curious where your mind immediately goes and the thoughts that come to you. But thinking about trust and like the erosion of trust as a society, and thinking back to, I remember when blockchain was brand new and it was exciting because you could trust the lineage of diamonds and the relevance and things. Is there an opportunity for this technology to sort of bring about more trust in reality, truth, shared reality? Because I fear with the algorithms and things, how we're, on one hand, you want that personalization, the context, the ability to drill deeper, but then we become like little Matthew McConaughey's and we're getting deeper and deeper in our own McConaughey-ness. No. But in that shared reality, I think it's always a loaded question because you have actors, motives, we all bring bias. And so I don't really think that one truth exists. And the more you know, the more you don't know. But I have to think there's an opportunity for this technology to bring about a little more of a shared cohesion around trust and reality, and what your thoughts are, if any.
Yeah, so it's a little bit beyond my expertise, right? So, so those are important problems, right? So, and I feel at least like 10 years ago when we start to work on decentralization, so one of the feeling was because you are start to push more and more control on every single user because the data is close to them, right? They have actually more control on what to share and what not, right? So it could become a really interesting and powerful tool toward the solution to the problem that you mentioned. So that was our feeling, right? And you see a lot of progress in the last 10 years. People push about differential privacy, right? People push about so many different ways to protect your data. I think we are definitely moving toward the right direction in actually solving a lot of those big problems. But I definitely agree, those are really important problems. Yeah.
So I think we can have time for one more question. And I was going to ask you, where do you think we need to work next to take AI where we want to take it to, and in terms of like building superintelligence? What do you think the key next step will be for product and commercial types of avenues?
Yeah, so I feel I think we are at the stage that figuring out how can we sustainably get compute and data, I think going to be the key, right? So like if you look at the last 10 years, right, the growth of compute and data pretty much bring us where we are today, right? Yeah. So, and for the next stage is going to be, if you want to push both sides out like 10 times more, there need to be a more sustainable way, right, to actually grow that, right? And hopefully decentralization provide one of the answer to some of the problem that about sustainable getting both, right? Sure. So I think figuring that out as a community, I think going to be like really useful. Yeah.
Right. Amazing. Cool. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks so much.